crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with host David Lamb and the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Good evening and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Got a really interesting topic of conversation and an interesting panel to lead that conversation as well. Before we get to that, just a reminder of how you can be a part, because trust me, tonight's conversation is one of those that you're going to have questions to ask, and there are easy ways for you to join our conversation. Call, text, email. That information is going to be at the bottom of your screen all throughout the program tonight. Also, Hollis Wright makes available, now this is important, Hollis Wright makes available every time we're on the air with this show, attorneys that are standing by live to speak with you. Call. That is a free, confidential, and all fair conversation. So yours for the taking, so take advantage of that. Leading our conversation, he's the managing partner of Hollis Wright. Josh Wright, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, too. And there actually are lawyers standing by right now to real people to answer these questions. You know, David, a lot of times, our law firm has a certain skill set at Hollis Wright of the things that we do and handle in the civil context. There are areas of the law where we don't have an expertise, and divorce and child custody is one of those areas. And so what we try and do is we're going to answer most questions confidentially off the air for you if you call, text, email, Facebook us, Twitter, whatever. But a lot of times what we're doing is we're getting an expert in a specific area of the law involved to be able to answer those questions. And that's a common practice we've done for over 11 years with this show. And Greg Starkey from the Birmingham men's law firm's on today. Kind of a local celebrity. Anyone that's ever listened to the radio knows. I feel like
me and Greg are friends.
He has one of the greatest southern drawls of all time. And it's just a guy like you almost want to hug him like you like him. You just like his voice. But we're so excited to have you on, and this is your expertise. This is what you do for a living, and it's why we bring you on. So we're super happy to have you on.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me here.
Absolutely. Just talk a little bit about your firm and just kind of about the Birmingham Men's Law Firm and just kind of how this all started for you.
Well, we started back in 2005. Actually, I started practicing in 2005. I probably gravitated toward representing men in divorce in around 2006, 2007. I found that, a lot of times when a husband and a wife will go into the courtroom, it seems like the wife always has the upper hand. It's basically the wife is saying, I want this, 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 and the husband's saying, I don't want to pay this, and he's kind of always behind the eight ball. So we kind of started specializing in representing men along about 2007, I guess, and it just kind of grown from there.
Have you noticed in your practice that a lot of times you're almost not just a counselor in the sense of a legal counselor, but you're really kind of handling men and people during divorce during one of their low points, and you've really got to kind of counsel them individually?
Definitely. I've been through a divorce myself, and I had children going through the divorce, and it was, it's not a good time in your life when you're going through a divorce, especially when you have children, and typically the mother gets custody of the children, so you're used to working, coming home, your kids being there every day, and then all of a sudden they're not there every day. You see them every other weekend. So it can be a big adjustment for a man.
So Greg, unwrap just a little bit about what are kind of the ways you can get divorced in Alabama and how that process works generally.
Well, typically there's two ways. The first one's the uncontested, which the parties, the husband and wife, would come together and they would agree on the terms of the divorce. Now, the terms of the divorce would be the splitting or the division of the assets, which is, any monies they have, houses, cars, stocks, bonds, stuff like that. Then the division of the debts, how the debts are going to be divided. If there's children in the divorce, they need to agree on the custodial times of the children, any child support, and then sometimes there's alimony that, it's would be something that need to be addressed, so they would have to agree on that. Now, if they can agree on all those terms, then what would happen one of them would hire an attorney. The attorney would draw the agreement up like they wanted, and then they would come in, sign the agreement, and then of course the attorney would have all the paperwork he'd have to file in with the court for the judge to sign off on. Now, if they can't come to an agreement on all the terms, then it's what they call a contested divorce. In a contested divorce, what happens is one of the spouses would, basically hire an attorney and have the other spouse served with a divorce complaint. After that spouse is served, then they would have 30 days to file an answer and typically a counter complaint, and then the judge would set it for normally either a settlement conference or a mediation. Most counties do that now because the case law or the case load for a court is so high that the judge, quite honestly, he doesn't have time to have a trial on every case. So they try to get as many cases settled as they can. So what happens is they set it for either a settlement conference or mediation. You and your attorney, your spouse and their attorney would go down there, and sometimes there's a mediator. And they would kind of go back and forth and try to craft an agreement between the parties that, both parties can live with. Now, judges always say both parties are going to be unhappy at the end of this divorce. There's, you have a pie, and you're not going to leave with the whole pie. The best you're going to leave with is half. So you're going to basically have half of what you had going in. So, but anyway, if they can get it settled, and typically if you have a couple of divorce attorneys that have experience, they kind of know what the law is. They typically know what the judge is going to rule on certain issues, and that can help get the case settled. But, after the settlement conference, they can't get it settled, then they'll set it for a hearing or a trial. And that would be where the parties would go in there with their attorneys. They'd present evidence through their testimonies, proof of income, they'd show assets, debts, things like that. Then the judge would make the decision on how everything's going to be split.
Do you find most cases settled through a mediation process, or do you end up having to try a bunch of these cases because people just can't agree because they get emotional about it?
They sometimes can get emotional about it, but a good divorce attorney can kind of, guide their client is a good word. They can kind of guide their client and say, look, this is probably how it's going to go down if we go to trial. So this agreement is actually better than what's going to happen at trial. So typically about 90% of the cases will settle.
So I know we're getting ready to go to break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about wrongdoing in the relationship and what impact that can have on the division of property, and how things like your home, where you may have a mortgage on it, are to be split, if they're to be sold or one spouse lives in it, how that settlement works. And I think Greg can kind of lead, guide, and direct us through that process.
All right. This is the perfect time to step aside. Our first break of the evening. A quick reminder, if you are on social media, Hollis Wright is as well. Wherever you prefer, whatever your preferred platform is, you'll find him there. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Just search Hollis Wright and you'll find them there. Stay tuned. More of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
The attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show 8 years ago, my hope was we would be able to do what we do best, which is to help people answer real-world legal-related issues they have in their life.
People oftentimes are confronting various legal issues and problems in their lives that range across the gamut of legal practice areas. Bankruptcy, criminal law, family law, just to name a few. And to be able to have a 30-minute platform or format to where we can just cover various legal topics once a week, that's obviously the primary focus of the show.
That we would be able to use the resources of the many lawyers we have at this law firm to create a plan that had a lasting impact that also gave back to the community at the same time. And I think we've done just that with the attorneys.
Welcome back to the Attorneys. Appreciate you being with us tonight talking about divorce. If you would like some free off-air legal advice, this is a subject matter that certainly stirs a lot of questions and raises a lot of questions. There's attorneys from Hollis, Wright, standing by right now to speak with you. That free off-air and confidential conversation is yours for the taking. Josh?
Yeah, and I know a lot of times, Greg, divorce is a super emotional deal for both sides, and including their families and extended family. How does wrongdoing or alleged wrongdoing play into resolution of these claims? If someone, for example, had infidelity or a threat of infidelity or a claim of infidelity, how does that kind of manifest itself in the divorce itself?
It depends. It's not as big a deal as it used to be, the infidelity part, I think, because it's so common now with Facebook and social media. Yeah. But it still does play a part. It can certainly, go against you if there's a issue of alimony. The judges are more likely to grant alimony to the injured spouse. Mm-hmm. Is if you've if you've had an affairs or just kind of checked out on the marriage. It can also affect custody issues sometimes especially if you've had an affair and you have had that girlfriend or boyfriend around your kids. That's usually a really, really bad thing when the judge goes to decide who's going to get custody.
And talk with me, because I know this is a question we get a lot. I live in my house with my spouse. We're getting a divorce. We have a mortgage. Am I going to lose my house? Do I have to sell my house? How do you advise people on that issue? Because that's kind of complicated.
That is one of the biggest sticking points of getting people through a divorce is that house and that mortgage, because especially back several years ago when people were buying at the high end of the market, and then prices dropped. I don't think that's that big a deal now, but one of the things that has to be decided is, is one spouse going to be able to continue to pay for their house on just their income? Now, a lot of times you have both the husband and the wife on the mortgage, so, one of them, if they keep the house, they're going to have to, number one, they're going to have to pay the other spouse out their portion of the equity. Yeah. And they're also going to have to get the house refinanced and get that mortgage out of their spouse's name. They can't just sign it over. The court has no power to put a mortgage in one person's name because that's a private contract between the parties and the mortgage company. Typically, if neither party is able to do that, then the house is put on the market and sold, and then the equity split.
Gotcha. You can imagine these are very emotional deals for folks. And having to sell your house versus being able to keep your house is a complicated analysis. You want to walk through it with someone that understands what they're doing to give you your options so that you can weigh your options and make the right choice.
And Greg seems like he's seen just about everything. Yeah. A question we've got here: what if I don't know where my spouse is, or they are ignoring the entire process?
Okay, that's a good question. The first case is if you don't know where your spouse is. That doesn't come up a lot, but it can come up in short-term marriages where there's really no assets and there's no children involved, and one spouse just decided he's had enough or she's had enough and they run off. What would happen then is you would retain an attorney. They would file in a divorce, and then you would have to sign an affidavit saying after reasonable efforts you've been unable to locate your spouse. At that point, the judge would allow you to basically serve your spouse through an ad in the paper. It runs for 4 weeks, and then after the last time it runs, the spouse would have 30 days to answer. If there's no answer, which there's typically not, then the attorney would file for a default judgment. The court would set for a hearing, and then you would go down there with your attorney and answer. I mean, technically it's a trial, but it's not a trial.
It's more of a default.
Yeah. And you're just giving testimony as to when you're married, when you separated, why you want the divorce. Now, one thing to remember is if you can't locate your spouse and get them personally served, the only thing the judge can do is grant a divorce. Mm-hmm. Cannot split assets, cannot split debts, cannot grant you child support, which is a big thing too. Yeah. So, but you can still get divorced. Now, the other case is where the spouse is just basically ignoring the process. When they get served and they just stick it on a shelf and say, I'm not getting divorced, because some people think that for some reason they have to sign a divorce to get divorced, and that's not the case. But anyway, if they don't file that answer within the 30 days, then once again the attorney would file for default judgment, and you'd go down there and basically you'd have a divorce trial, but the only person giving testimony would be you. And you'd say, this is what I make, this is what I think my husband makes or my wife. These are assets, these are our debts, and then the judge would basically grant the divorce, and he would go ahead and divide the assets, debts, child support, custody. And typically, of course, it's always going to be in your favor because you're the one that showed up. Yeah. So.
Talk for a second. Let's move to a separate topic from divorce, and that is child custody. At what stage does the child have the ability to explain to the court if they want to live with one of the spouses over the other? How does that work?
Well, technically the child never has the last say in where they want to live. That's always the judge's decision. Now the parties can come to an agreement, certainly about custody, but if it goes in front of a judge, the judge can take into account the child's wishes or the child's testimony, but that doesn't mean that the child has a right to decide custody. The custody is decided on the standard of best interest of the child, and the judge looks at factors such as the age and sex of the child, the relationship between the children and the parents, the relationship between the parents, the home environment of each parent, and then the judge will typically make a decision based on that.
Okay. I know we're going to break. When we come back, I do want to talk a little bit about child support, how long it lasts, whether college is included. Those are all things that I think Greg can hit for us to help the viewing audience.
All right, we're stepping aside. Our final break of the evening. Stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm attorney Bobby Bell with Hollis, Wright Law Firm. In today's world, social media is all around us. It is common for many people to post on social media regarding their life and activities on a daily basis. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and similar social media are a great way to stay connected to others and to share your experiences and thoughts. Some seemingly innocent social media posts, however, can have devastating effects if you're involved in litigation, especially in a personal injury claim, a contested divorce, or a child custody battle. Courts regularly allow adverse parties access to the other side's social media accounts, allowing relevant posts to be presented as evidence. These rules have allowed social media to become a hotbed of information in the litigation world. In fact, we are seeing more and more preservation orders issued by courts requiring you to collect and save any and all social media activity. Therefore, it's advisable that even before there's litigation, lawyers should advise their clients that social media content may be discoverable. Here are a few helpful tips. 1. Do not post anything about the case. This includes posts regarding conversations or meetings with your attorneys, remarks about your injuries, negative remarks about the opposing party. Do not post anything you would not want read in open court to either a judge or a jury. 2. Avoid new friend requests from people you do not know. Many law firms and insurance offices may attempt to have employees follow you on social media in an attempt to gain information. 3. Limit adding new photos, check-ins, photo tagging, etc. Seemingly innocent posts may be used against you. Regular check-ins at restaurants, parties, or other events with friends can cast doubt on any claims of loss of enjoyment of life, pain and suffering, or emotional distress, since you appear to be living life as usual. 4. Increase your privacy settings. Many social media sites frequently update and change their privacy settings. In the litigation context, it is possible you may have to preserve and present anything you posted. Therefore, we encourage you to be smart and careful when using social media. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. Thanks for watching The Attorneys on WBTM 13.
Welcome back into The Attorneys, our final segment here. So about 6 minutes remaining. So if you want to take advantage of the opportunity to get in touch with us or get with those attorneys who are standing by live to speak with you, about 6 minutes remaining for you to do so. Josh?
Talk a little bit just generally about child support and how that works, because we get a lot of questions about, how long does child support last? Is college included? Can you just kind of unwrap that issue a little bit for us?
Sure. I guess the first answer would be child support lasts until the child in Alabama, it lasts till the child turns 19 or becomes self-supporting, whichever comes first. As far as how child support is figured, basically Alabama has what they call child support guidelines. And judges have very little discretion not to follow those guidelines. It has to be some extenuating circumstances for them to vary from those guidelines. But basically what happens is, I'm going to kind of use an example, but you have the husband and wife, you take their combined total income, and then you take the number of children, and then you go to the guidelines, and it'll give you a total child support number. Then you add in if there's any daycare costs and health insurance costs. And then let's say the father makes 60% of the income, the mother makes 40. If the mother's awarded custody, then the father would pay 60% of that number that you figured according to the guidelines. And if he has the insurance, he would get to deduct that out of his child support. But it's not, a lot of people think it is, but it's not one of those things you can negotiate in a divorce. It's set by the state, and quite frankly, they don't care if you can afford it or not. That's what you have to pay.
Does the court have more discretion on issues of alimony than that of child support?
Yeah, so you have court has a lot more discretion when it comes to awarding alimony and for how long and how much. Now I believe it was the Supreme Court has come up with some guidelines in the last couple of years, but they're not very specific. It basically states that if you're married for 5 years, then typically if there's alimony involved, that the spouse would get alimony for 5 years. If it's a long-term marriage, which is typically 20 years or more, then alimony can be awarded until basically forever, until one of the spouses die or the one receiving the alimony gets remarried. But there's a lot of issues in trying to figure out what the amount of alimony is going to be based on the income of the parties. If the income's pretty much even, then there's probably not going to be alimony. And then getting back to what we had talked about earlier, the judge can also award alimony based on if you were basically the wrongdoer in the marriage. They can award that spouse alimony, but it's typically to keep, as best the court can, it's typically to keep both parties living in the standard of living that they had before the divorce during the marriages, and the court tries to do that the best they can.
If there are adjustments year to year from one spouse's income, or they lose a job, does the court reevaluate those things yearly?
No, they do not. Basically, it's up to one of the parties to file for a modification of alimony, and it has to be, a substantial change or a material change of circumstances in order for the judge to basically refigure alimony.
Okay. I know we're coming to final thought real quick, just real quickly.
Sure.
College, is it covered in these deals?
It is not.
Okay.
Now, the parties can agree to split college. Okay. Normally, if they agree, it's agreed, it's split.
Okay.
But unless it's agreed upon, college is not covered.
Fair enough. All right.
About a minute and a half remaining. Just time enough for a quick final thought. Greg, from you first, please.
Yes. One thing I was going to say, and we always advise our clients about this, if you have children and you get a divorce and you're not the custodial parent, let's say you're only getting visitation for every other weekend, it's super important for you to stay involved in your children's lives even during your non-custodial periods. And what I'm saying is, go to the school, meet with their teachers, have dinner or lunch with them at school. If they're in extracurricular activities, make sure you attend those extracurricular activities. You're at their practices. You stay as much involved in their lives as you can, even during your non-custodial periods.
I think that's great advice. As we mentioned earlier, David, there are certain things our law firm just is not an expert in, and having Greg on is one of these topics, and he does such a great job. And I love to just listen to him talk about this stuff because he's obviously really, really passionate about it. And it's a complicated time in people's lives, right? It's not just a simple saying, well, we're just filing this divorce. He's got to counsel them through this process, and they need someone to lead, guide, and direct them through the process when it happens. So we're super excited to have you on, and I appreciate your passion for it. You got it. You got it.
Greg, good to see you. Josh, thanks so much. Appreciate you guys being with us, and as always, we really appreciate you being with us as well. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.